Oh, wait. Perfect. I was waiting for that. All right. Well, welcome everyone. I see some more people have hopped on since we shared the introduction prompt. Jake, if you want to send that in again, I think that would be good. Right. Well, tonight is the last session of the 2024-2025 Training as Action series. And we're going to be discussing the theory of change model. So I'm Carly. I became involved with HRUSA as an Edmonds Fellow last summer, where we worked on the development of this year's Training as Action series. I'm currently a foundation administrator for a substance use disorder treatment nonprofit. Um, I'm very excited to be with you guys tonight. Jake, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Carly. Hi, everyone. I'm Jake Skripik. I'm a social studies teacher in Manchester, Connecticut, and I am a member of the HRUSA steering committee. Thanks for everyone for being here. We're excited for a great evening together. We did post in the chat this quick check-in. If you haven't had a chance to do so, please feel free. We'd love to hear your name, your role, your institution, and where you're located, and then just a little bit about your knowledge or experience with the theory of change model. We're curious where people are coming in from, and maybe either the have you used the theory of change model before, or have you used other systems models in your own work. Before we get into it tonight, we just want to make sure that everyone kind of knows our norms and expectations as we're coming in. We're going to have some dialogue and time for discussion tonight to really hone in on what the theory of change is and exchange with one another about our particular work and the work of HRUSA. We just want to make sure that folks know these are some of our norms and expectations for dialogue and engaging with one another. You might have seen some similar ones in your own work. So responsibility, empathy, sharing airtime, really making sure that one, I always say passing the mic, right? Making sure that people have enough time to speak their truth and give as much as possible to the conversation. Active participation. We want your enthusiasm. We want your energy in the conversation. Communicating clearly, right? Carly and I are going to try and do that, and we would love you all to do the same. Really making sure that we're exchanging with productivity and trust and engaging in this really environment of solidarity and community building around the theory of change. So this respect model, we would love you all to just kind of keep these in the back of your head as we are doing this work tonight. All right, I'll pass it back to Carly.
Sweet, thank you. Um, so first, I just want to give you a brief overview of how the night is gonna go. We're gonna start with an introduction of the theory of change, and tonight's presentation. So we're gonna go over the objectives. We'll move into the where the theory of change originated from, and what the purpose of the theory of change was, and still is. And then we're gonna move into a kind of more in-depth conversation around how to apply the theory of change. We're going to be using a model from HRE USA's work to involve youth or to engage youth in human rights work. And then we're going to end with a concluding discussion around how we can all work better to engage youth in human rights work. So, sweet. So our objectives for tonight are to explore the theory of change, to participate in a theory of change exercise exploring how to meaningfully incorporate youth in human rights advocacy, determine the characteristics of spaces that are youth safe and analyze how to integrate these characteristics into one's own work, and lastly, to brainstorm how to design spaces that are youth safe and youth led. So, moving into the history of the theory of change, the concept of the theory of change was first introduced in the 1950s by Kirkpatrick in the four levels of learning evaluation model. The model was popularized in 1995 when it was introduced and adopted by the Aspen Institute and Carol Wise, or Weiss. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce the last name. The model serves as a tool to evaluate causal relationships between a program's inputs and outcomes. So the theory of change model was preferred by the Aspen Institute over other models like logic frames because it helps to articulate the assumptions that were made in planning, how the inputs would result in the desired outcomes. So the theory of change also encourages organizations to look at short-term goals to make the larger goals more attainable. The theory of change model was introduced as a way to see, kind of came about in conversations around why are other models of evaluation falling short. And so in creating a more obtainable large goal through a series of small goals, um, the idea was to have a better evaluation tool overall. So, for example, the HRE USA long-term goal in the strategic plan is to increase youth leadership. One of the short-term goals then for HRE USA has been to work towards achieving this goal through youth leadership and human rights through the Youth Award. Overall, and we'll discuss that more in another slide, but overall, the goal is to see how an organization can make their desired impact and what the assumptions are going into that impact. All right, so now I'm going to jump into the theory of change. I see that a lot of you mentioned that you're kind of familiar with the theory of change, but we just kind of wanted to introduce one example of what that theory actually looks like in a model. So this is just one. This is the one that works best for my brain. Other people like circular models of the goals to show how it's more of an interconnected process. But models force us to consider how a given intervention will lead to a specific change. And so I think in thinking about that, I like the more linear model because it shows how our inputs bring us to the long-term goal at the end. And so the theory of change is pulling from this causal analysis of the available evidence to us. So it's kind of saying if we do X, it will lead to Y, and that is shown by Z. Now that's a very like scientific way of thinking about it. But it's really showing how if we put in this specific thing like time or money, it will lead to engagement of youth. And that is shown by how successful this other kind of program we have done has been. So some of the key aspects of the theory of change include taking an organization's goals and seeing what needs to be done to achieve them. So if HRE USA wants to engage a younger audience, what do we need to do to and put into our work to do so? This includes looking at both the inputs and the outputs. What are we investing in the goal? What are we doing to achieve the goal? And who are we reaching? These questions also require to think about what we are assuming about our goals, inputs, and outputs, and what external factors are going to be influencing our process. The theory of change model really wants us to lay out the risks and assumptions related to the work we are doing and the changes we want to see so we can better kind of analyze how these risks and assumptions may impact the outcomes in a way we weren't expecting. And you can kind of see how these all play together and lead into the outcomes in the impact section. So you kind of see how the assumptions and external factors are on the bottom, but it's kind of a reminder of something we always need to be keeping in the back of our heads. Like for example, if we were looking at how to engage youth in human rights education work today, an external factor we need to consider that could be preventing youth from kind of joining in on these conversations is fear around some of these kind of attacks on human rights practitioners and advocates that are happening today. So that's kind of an external factor that we might not initially consider when looking at the inputs and the outputs and seeing how we're going to achieve our goals. But it's really important to consider how these other outside factors are going to play into that.
All right. Well, thank you, Carly. We wanted to just take a quick pause before we move forward. And we're a pretty small group tonight, so we love folks to unmute if they have thoughts about this question. Carly laid out really kind of the broad strokes and the potential impacts of using this TOC model in your particular work. And so again, kind of thinking about the different elements. I'll go back for 1 minute here. Just going back to, hold on one second. Thinking about the inputs, the outputs, the outcomes, this entire scheme of the theory of change. Our question to you is, what are some of the key characteristics or elements that stand out to you of the theory of change? And what are some of the elements or what's being presented right now that maybe kind of push you to think deeper about your own work? So key characteristics and elements that stand out to you, and then anything that's kind of pushing you to think deeper about your own work. We'd welcome anyone to unmute and just share your initial thoughts as we pause for a few minutes.
I did put the question in the chat too, if you want us to go back to the picture of the model, if that helps.
I mean, I can speak out like as an educator, to me, the theory of change really resonates with backwards planning. If I'm looking at a unit, I'm trying to figure out like, what are we trying to do here? Like, what's the big understanding and what are some of the steps that we can take to get there? But certainly, what can I do to not only catch, but maintain interest throughout and ensure that students are involved and have choice throughout that process too. So to me, I mean that is a theory of change, is backward planning model.
Yeah, for sure.
Thank you, Danielle. I'll just weigh in. I think, I myself I'm a practicing teacher, and that idea of backwards design, a lot of times we're not always thinking about that, right? We're thinking about the daily, what comes up, what's immediate in the next 5 hours, 10 hours. But I think you're resonating around a really important point around whether we're talking about a lesson plan or whether they're talking about organizational change. Where are we heading? What are we thinking about in terms of the long-term goals? And then again, working backwards around these kind of key benchmarks is critical to really make sure we have sustainable work. Otherwise, if we're just thinking in the short term, then we might be a little maybe short-sighted in our work in particular. So I appreciate you raising that.
I just one thought about what I see about it and what I like about it is it's a way to really see the interconnected parts, to actually be able, depending on what kind of process you're going through, what your end goal is, but to really be able to see the different elements that go together or that interact with each other to ultimately connect to your goal. So it's a way to just gain a sense of this interconnectivity of all the different elements that you're trying to utilize and weigh out as you decide what to do next.
Mm. Thank you, Sandy. And I think I'll just raise the point that a lot of times in organizational development, sometimes we might become a little myopic, right? And that it's just
Right.
natural that we dig ourselves into a rabbit's hole of thinking about one particular element or one particular part of project work. And I appreciate you saying that the interconnectedness is something we have to keep in the back of our heads and at the front of our heads in every kind of operational thing that we do as an organization.
Yeah, really quick, I want to add the point in the chat as well. So we had a member who, oh, was someone going to speak up? Oh, okay. So one of our participants mentioned that awareness is a big thing because before joining a course like this, they did know of human rights, but didn't really understand the big impact and the aspect of how everything is connected. And I think that's a really interesting point to raise with a model like this. And I think the circular models that some people use for this kind of show how everything really is interconnected. And I think it also goes to, I think it was Danielle's point about the backwards design, because when you're building in a circular model, you have your goal and you're working from your goal to achieve your goal. And it's all kind of interconnected in that way. That's a really good way. Both of those are really good points on how to think about this.
Any other thoughts, questions, things we want to raise before we move forward?
Or does anybody have any questions about the theory of change model? I know I spoke relatively quickly and dumped a lot of information at you. So if you have questions about it before we move into a more hands-on engagement of the theory of change model, feel free to send something in the chat or unmute really quick. All right, sweet. Then we're going to move into our discussion on the theory of change and human rights educators USA. So first we're going to look at HRE USA's youth engagement efforts as a whole. One of the key parts, in my opinion, of HRE USA's strategic plan for the coming years is youth engagement and youth leadership. And so to achieve that goal, HRUSA has a variety of means and projects to engage youth. This is a list of a few of the different areas that HRE USA works to engage youth. So the first is the Youth Award. So this is a way to acknowledge youth who are engaging in human rights education work, whether that be like activism or grassroots organizing. That's a really cool and exciting way that HRUSA engages youth. The second is the Training as Action series. So that's what we're in right now. In my opinion, HRUSA engages youth in two different means in the Training as Action series. First, in having youth and young people be part of the planning and doing the hands-on work for the Training as Action series, but then also in having youth be a key participant base for the program. And then, so moving on to the podcast is another way that HRUSA engages youth in two different kind of ways. So first, a key audience that HRUSA is trying to engage in the podcast are young people. But one of the other really cool aspects of the podcast is that they interview young people. So this is not just educators talking about human rights education for young people to listen to, but it's also engaging young people in conversations around um, really important conversations that need to be happening today about human rights education. So the fourth means is team involvement. So HRUSA engages youth and young people through a variety of means, both um, in the Trainees Action Series program development, but also young people are an active part of HRE USA's steering committee and leadership and decision making. And I think that's very important for an organization that does human rights education work. And then lastly is the Edmonds Fellowship. I'm super biased about the Edmonds Fellowship in HRE USA's youth engagement efforts. But I think this is a really powerful way to empower young people and also help them get hands-on leadership experience in human rights education and encourage them to continue to pursue this career. Yeah, I can give an example of a podcast episode. So we're going to talk about the podcast as our hands-on example, but I'm gonna give a little plug for the Edmonds Fellows podcast. I think that was episode 51. But it was all of the fellows and I on it. So it's a nice conversation about some young people from across the US um, and our experiences with human rights education, both growing up and our experiences in higher education. So that's a really cool one. I think it's episode 51, but I'm not 100% sure now. I can look a little bit deeper, but yeah, all of us are now, well, we were in college, and are pursuing graduate school, now. But it was a really interesting conversation. We talked about the attacks on human rights education, that we're seeing with the current administration. Thank you, Tia. Um, we talked about the attacks on human rights education, some of the barriers human rights education is facing today, and how we think we could overcome some of those barriers, and why human rights education is so important. Um, but then, yeah, the Edmonds Fellowship is also a really cool way, and they're tied because that's an episode of all the Edmonds Fellows. So, So now, as a group, we're going to dig a little bit deeper into the podcast. As an example of HRUSA's attempts to engage youth. So I kind of laid out some information for us here as a little like mini theory of change model. We're going to look at this data, and then in discussion rooms, we will all we have some questions that we're going to pose to you all to do a little deeper dive on the effectiveness of the podcast and what might need to be changed or what we're thinking about the podcast considering this data and the goals. So the first goal of HRUSA's podcast is to engage youth. The second is to spread HRUSA's mission. And the third is to share human rights education stories, practices, and related issues. So the inputs to achieve said goals include the podcast infrastructure and team, planning time with the team. They do a lot of work to see where the podcast is going, how the podcast is being received. I know they just had a meeting about it. And then the last input is fundraising and grant funding to continue to offer this really cool little form of education. And so the current outputs that HRUSA is seeing on the podcast, the average listeners per episode from the last data I had was 49 listeners. Less than 1% of those listeners was between 0 and 17. 6% of listeners were between 18 and 22. And then I have some additional stats that I wanted to share with you all that just didn't fit on the graphic, but 38% of listeners, which is the biggest category, are between the ages of 45 and 59, and 70% of listeners identify as women. Most listeners are in the US. So, considering this data and the goals of the podcast, we want to raise some questions. We're going to break everybody out into small groups so we can engage with these questions. And I'll put the questions in the chat as well so that when we're in the breakout rooms, we don't forget the questions.
All right, thank you, Carly. So some of the questions, as we're putting those in the chat, if we're kind of putting you in the mindset of if your particular goal was to engage youth in this particular podcast, right? So it's hard to kind of place ourselves, but if you were on the podcast team and the HRUSA podcast team, and if your goal was to try and engage youth, these are some of the questions we'd like you to consider. What would be your long-term desired outcomes for youth involvement in the podcast? What would be your short-term desired outcomes within 2 years for youth involvement in the podcast? Looking back at some of the data, and the facilitators in your group will give you some of that data. What have we done well already? What do we need to improve upon? So those are kind of the things we are doing well, the glows, and some of the grows, things we need to improve upon. For example, and we'll just give you kind of a quick tidbit here, where might youth voices be left out or readily included? Is that a consideration we need to kind of think about as a podcast team? And what would you need to do to get those desired outcomes? That might be a little bit of a stretch of a question, but we'd like you to at least consider it in your small breakout rooms tonight to really think about, again, if you were on the podcast team and really orchestrating it with this goal in mind, what would be kind of your thought process and planning moves? All right. Those are in the chat. If you can give me 1 minute, I'm going to set out breakout rooms. We're going to do about 20 minutes of conversation and then bring it back together in a little bit. Hang on
And I
one.
just want to say that your facilitators, so myself, Jake, and Sandy, will be taking notes in the breakout rooms just so everybody has a takeaway of this conversation so that when we're working with strategic planning and theory of change models in our work, we can kind of remember these questions and the considerations that we were raising in this conversation. With the theory of change or with the training as action series, we think it's really important to have something to take away from the sessions. And so having these notes so that we can consider some other considerations or hard questions to ask yourself while engaging the theory of change could be really helpful.
All right, folks. We're going to, again, do about 20 minutes or so in our breakout rooms. Sandy, Carly, and I will lead you through the conversation. And we will see you in about 20 minutes or so. And we look forward to hearing from you in a little bit. See you soon. Oh, it's all good, man. I know the lights turned off. It's all good, man. It's okay. I'm on a quick call, but no worries. Hello, Brian. Welcome. We're just coming back from small group conversations, so you're hopping into a broader conversation right now. Thanks for being on.
Oh, no problem. Yeah, I'm going to be listening in only for today.
All right.
I just got back from the surgeon again, so I'm kind of out of it.
Well, we're wishing you the best, keeping you going as much as possible.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. It's looking like we have most folks back. We hope your conversations were enriching and really meaningful. Maybe we could do a quick, very quick share out per breakout room, and then we have some concluding questions we'd like to bring the full group back on. But maybe Carly, do you want to give a minute or two of just quick highlights from your conversation?
Yeah, our conversation really centered around how do we empower young people to recognize that they are also experts in human rights education, and that they have like interesting points that we all want to hear. Um, and how do we kind of engage uh, these younger advocates and grassroots organizers and students and people who don't consider themselves human rights or in education, how do we engage them um, to become a part of this conversation? How do we kind of spread that? Is it a problem of like the rhetoric that we're using, or is it something we're doing unintentionally? So it was a really good conversation, and we really talked about the rhetoric a lot around maybe using the term human rights learners, because even those of us who are educators are also learning at the same time. And does learning make people feel more like they can join in and you're not expected to be perfect when you come into human rights education? Like we are all growing together. It was a really good conversation in our group.
Thank you very much. Sandy, do you want to give quick highlights from your group?
Yes, and I really appreciated the input of Corinne and Danielle. Do you want me to, are we going to go through the various questions or just a highlights?
I think highlights for now, and then we have some follow-up questions.
Well, I thought that there were actually some really excellent ideas about how to engage youth. And I think one of the key things that came out was we may not, our outreach is vital to actually reach both educators and youth, and that we might not be knowing where the youth are, that perhaps we should try things like youth centers, and also have more awareness among educators. I loved, there was a suggestion about hosting a competition among high schoolers to actually do podcast episodes where the youth would be defining the topics, but that they're geared toward highlighting youth advocacy for human rights. So some really great ideas.
Thank you very much. That's very exciting. I'll share real quick on our group. We talked a lot about just the possibilities that come from cross-generational work, whether it's interviewing or focusing the interviewees as the podcast in terms of cross-generational young people, or really focusing. We dove a little bit deeper into leading the podcast, really making sure that it is fully youth-led, or at least there's some youth adult partnership elements that are part of the human structures behind the podcast. We talked a lot about the engagement factor and, quite frankly, the edutainment factor that comes with podcasts. So yes, a lot of us love driving and having the audio medium to this, but how do we make sure for our folks, particularly under 18, that we are centering a visual medium to the podcast? So we taught some structures around, could we put it on YouTube? Could we really try to recruit young people to tell their authentic stories through the podcast? Given that, yes, there are FERPA and privacy concerns, we were talking about some of the logistics behind that. And there was really some good ideas around, and this is all focused around sustainability, but training, particularly K to 12 students, on how to engage and be part of the pre, during, and post-production of the podcast. So if we really authentically want to bring young people into and to the table of this work, having them there and actually training them on the production side of doing the podcast. We also talked about maybe an HRE mini series where we bring young people and we could potentially recruit student animators, students who are interested and invested in doing this other type of visual medium work around the podcast. And then we kind of closed out with what's the incentive? What's going to draw young people to the table? We could try to recruit students, but what's going to be the ultimate carrot that's going to bring them to the table and want to continue to do this good work? I'll leave it to my group for a second. Did I miss anything? Anything else we want to share from our quick highlights? Getting a thumbs up from Tia. So excellent. All right. Well, I'll turn it back over to Carly.
Sounds good. That was, man, I wish I could have been in all of the breakout rooms because everyone's conversations went on different paths, but also overlapped so much. We also talked about the importance of keeping young people safe right now in these conversations around human rights. But also we talked about the intergenerational conversations that should be happening. The point about the visual aspect of a podcast is very interesting. So large chunk of the podcasts I consume, I am watching and not just listening. So it's not even something I considered, and that's how I consume podcasts myself. So, yeah, really good conversations, and we'll get those notes out to everybody. We'll also be taking notes in this concluding conversation we're going to be having. We have some concluding questions and thoughts that we want you all to consider, but we also want you to feel free to offer any other considerations or questions that you would like to raise, if there's anything that's really sticking with you that we haven't touched on. And again, we'll be sharing out these notes with everybody so that we can move forward in all of our human rights education work with these considerations and takeaways. So, and feel free to just come off of mute or add in the chat if there's anything that you want to say, if any of these questions is particularly compelling to you. We'll give you a second to read out the questions, or I can read out the questions as well. So the first question that we posed is, what are the critical characteristics of safe, inclusive, youth-led spaces? The second question is, how might the theory of change help integrate or amplify youth at the center of human rights work? Where might youth voices be left out or not readily included when implementing organizational change? What are tangible actions or meaningful work for youth to be included? And lastly, how could you use the theory of change to amplify youth voice involvement in human rights work, whether that be organizations or advocacy? And again, we don't have to stick to these questions. If there's something that's really sticking with you, or if there's a point that you're talking about in your breakout rooms that you want to consider or pose to the whole group.
Okay, I wasn't going to speak, but I'll throw out an idea. I mean, I love this notion around watching and listening to podcasts, and we've discussed it. And we do have some of the videos from the podcast as well. So just an idea that I'm like, wow, if we were working with young people to try and either go into these videos and figuring out even just smaller splices of them, because we also, I guess, in our group talked about like key questions, or how do we have the subjects line up with things that are of interest for, so that if we're posting things on Instagram, how could they, some of the topics be, linking back?
Yeah, that's a good point, Christy. I also want to share out, I'm so sorry if I mispronounce your name, but what Myra added to the group or to the chat. I keep saying group chat because I'm used to texting and I haven't been on Zoom in a while. But Myra said something I think is a good way to reach out is going where youth are. For example, this last weekend, Bernie Sanders went to Coachella to talk to young people, and I believe we have to take the same approach when it comes to educating and bringing awareness to try to get them involved in a meaningful way. And I think that's a really good and important point to raise. There were a lot of political messages that were raised at Coachella this year, and I think that is a really good platform. Where are the young people? I think with the audio-visual aspects of a podcast, something I was thinking as we were talking about that is TikTok. A lot of young people are watching clips of podcasts on TikTok, and it's just a 30-second to a minute clip about a question and an answer, but it's one of those ways where you can start engaging young people on a current event or a current question. Um, Christy, that's a good point. Lots of time to engage young people. But yeah, how do we get to where the young people are? And especially in a moment where I think young people across this country are feeling a little bit isolated and nervous around human rights education. How do we, I think this was Jess's point in our breakout room, but how do we create a network where young people feel empowered to talk about human rights education and get involved in the work of human rights education?
So I'd just like to add, I think that what I've learned in the work we've done with the world as it could be, and I feel that youth, there are two aspects. One is that they really feel like they have some agency in how they are generating ideas about concepts that they're learning, like human rights, that they can use creative arts expressions or whatever those might be. I also think it's important that they're able to see that older people, the elders, perhaps the adults, are listening to them, that they have an opportunity to be the teachers and get recognition from another generation, not just their own youth, but that there's an interchange, but they are the ones that are helping to present information and at the same time get true feedback uh, and credit from older people, so that there's an interchange going on, because youth need to be recognized by the I think is commonly called the elder community, in terms of initiating youth as part of it. And it's not just talking to themselves or their peers, but to people that can really say, I hear you, and this is how we could be together or do something together.
That's a really good point, Sandy, and it's something we talked about as well as how do we empower youth. And I know Christy raised in our breakout room, like how recognizing how people who might have more experience in the traditional sense with human rights education, how we might unintentionally be making youth feel not welcome or not like they're experts. And how do we flip that script so that they do feel like they have agency and recognizing that we want to learn from them as well? Yeah.
I think the first question, what are the critical characteristics of a safe and inclusive youth-led spaces? I think in general, that's just a thought experiment because everyone will have their own opinions, but I do think one of them is very like centering, like I explain to students, like and kids in general and youth, like everyone in here is going to have a voice, whether they utilize it in full group conversation or in small group conversation, but everyone will have a voice and you will respect that voice. And at least like for my students, because I teach history, so we do talk about a lot of heavy topics that do start moving into like, well, human rights, how does that kind of work together? And like one thing they always say is like, yeah, the classroom is youth led, but having an adult there means it's also the responsibility of the adult that if something goes wrong, that you take away, like, you bring the conversation back and you regain control to keep everyone safe. So I think like understanding, like, yes, we want youth to lead, but we are in such a society where they're used to listening to one adult all day, every day, that when something goes wrong, they may not be able to do it. So it is the job of the adult to bring everything back together and be like, okay, we're done. Or even if you, hey, you stepped out of line, I need you to step out of this space so I can talk to you and everyone else can continue. And like understanding like that is okay. That is still a safe and inclusive space. We are still working with children who need to be taught certain skills or and understand like things you say, even if it wasn't your intention, does have an impact.
I think that's a good point, Samantha. Um, I think that's a really good point in the sense that learning to respect boundaries is really important. And also I think that's often an overlooked characteristic of a safe and inclusive space is having somebody there that ensures that we are continuing to respect each other and stay in line with our community norms and our guidelines. Um, and knowing that if somebody does start to feel unsafe or make others feel unsafe, there is a voice there that can help bring that conversation back. And sometimes it is unintentional when that happens. And I think ensuring that we are all continuing to create a learning environment um, where there is like giving each other grace, but also recognizing when boundaries are crossed. Yeah.
Can I raise a point off of that? And I'm kind of throwing a question to the whole audience here. So I heard a lot tonight about really making sure that through our respective work, our organization, whether it's HRUSA or your own institutions, that we're centering youth, that we're bringing them to the table, that we're making sure that they are included in the design and the organizational change that we're trying to achieve. And I don't know if I even want an answer to this, but I think one thought comes to mind is, what if I'm a young person who just doesn't want to do this or really feels like I don't have the tools to get involved? That I might feel like I just want to kind of keep my nose to the ground and focus on the tangibles in front of me. Or the third element is, this is risky work, right? Like HRE is risky and bold, and you have to kind of put yourself out there. So I don't know. I'm curious about, like, if we are asking or calling in young people to do this work, whether it's on a podcast or join HRUSA or join your institutions or whatever it might be, there might be the answer might be back to us, no, that's too risky. I don't really want to do that. So I think that's maybe just a consideration for us, is how do we not make it risk adverse, but really try to build a space that either mitigates that risk or really tries to support young people authentically, knowing that that might be at the front of their brains. I don't know if folks have thoughts about that. It's just something that I was thinking about as we're conversing tonight.
I actually do have a thought on that. So I didn't spend a lot of time working in the theater in high school, but you always do have to have people working in the background. Someone has to hold the camera. Someone has to help write the script. So if you have kids that don't want to be on camera, they don't want to be speaking, but they still want to be involved, there are options for them besides just, I don't want to do this. I don't want to be in this class. I want to do something else. There can be a middle ground of they can be involved without putting themselves all the way out there, and they may at some point decide that they do want to be out there.
Thanks, Corinne. Really appreciate that. I agree wholeheartedly.
I'd just like to see if perhaps Danielle would like to speak, because I think this was her comment in our group, but that one of the key things is to help young people understand how human rights affects them and get beyond just themselves. And I don't know if Danielle wants to build on what you said, but I thought that was really important, that that's on the part of we adults, educators, et cetera, is to provide opportunities for young people to say, hey, what difference does all this make to me? Why should it matter to me? And to be able to make some connection. So I hope perhaps Danielle might speak up more about it. I'm pretty sure it was you that said that.
Yeah, I mean, I have two things. So one, oh God, I'm about to lose it. I'm terrible. I was like writing notes for myself. But one thing that I was starting to write in the chat is that representation is imperative. People need to see people like them or their own experiences exemplified to feel more comfortable. So I think that that really lends itself to not only the intergenerational work that was being spoken of, but also communal work that can be conducted as well, getting students out into the community and seeing other people like them being change makers. I also think the second thing kind of lends itself to what Corinne was saying, which I thought was so cool and such a good point, is that human rights work looks like so many different things. Human rights work doesn't have to be this like monumental action. It can literally be hanging out with your peers at the YMCA after school, and you guys came together and decided to stand up for another kid at the center who really wasn't fitting in that well. Like there's so many different ways this could lend itself. And I think opening it up to experiences that are more relative to general youth, maybe not these like, I'm standing at the United Nations giving this speech, but like I'm a person and I care about others. Tap into that a little bit.
Thank you. I know Tia has been trying to say something too, so I just want to make sure we make space for you as well.
Going kind of piggybacking off of all of you, and when I was an undergrad, It's on Us was a big thing, and it wasn't on my campus, and I am the first person to do anything. I don't care. But there's a lot of people I went to a very conservative school in up north in Bemidji, Minnesota, if you ever heard of it. Yes, I do talk like that sometimes. And I was kind of the poster child. Everyone thought I was doing all this work, which yes, I did some of it, but there was a whole team behind me. And I did that for 2 years. And after a full year of doing it all by myself, I had people standing by me. So I think a lot of to try to find those like champions that is just one person that is willing to just be the poster person, to have that theater background for them, to have them. And then it gives a space to feel comfortable. Like I was a junior, and a lot of freshmen were seeing what I was doing, but they're like, I'm a freshman. I am not gonna go, not, we weren't going against the like academics, but a lot of the messaging was towards the academic, or not the academics, the athletics, and no freshman wants to do that, which is fair. I barely wanted to do it. It was terrifying. But my senior year, I had a lot of the freshmen being like, I saw what you did. I needed a year. I can do this now. And then I graduated feeling happy that there was more champions that was the baton was left to. So I feel like something like that, of like making a small little thing of, and I had a lot of I was an adult, but adult help during this time as well, which was really, really valuable for my growth in the human rights kind of tipping my toe into. I hope that made sense. I was kind of rambling, but yes, I love what everyone's saying.
No, that made absolute sense, and that's a really good example. I think that kind of really exemplifies everything we have been saying, making sure people feel empowered. And sometimes that is finding that person who is willing to put themselves out there, um, and supporting those who are doing the behind the scenes work, because eventually more people will feel comfortable. I'm going to pull from a little example, from my personal life, not necessarily my personal life, from my dad's personal life. My dad has been the um, teacher support person, for what started as the Gay Straight Alliance, but is now the Student Alliance for Equality at the high school he teaches at. In his first year doing the club, when they took the yearbook photo, it was just him and the president, because the other students didn't feel empowered to be in the yearbook as a member of that group. But this year, every student that he has felt empowered to take their photo and be in the yearbook. And it's really like those small actions, where this was a group, a larger group, but only the president felt comfortable, and how continuing to support the president and seeing how people responded to that person who's out there, like Tia putting themselves out there, um, how that really makes other young people feel empowered. And when you see adult support, so when you see those adults that supported Tia, or the educators who really help advocate for students' best interests, how that can start to make other people who are doing the behind the scenes work feel empowered, and also recognizing that that behind the scenes work is human rights work, like what Danielle was saying. Like every little action is like almost like a form of resistance in the way that you are empowering and encouraging and expanding these conversations around human rights education. Um, yeah, I want to make sure we have enough time to do the feedback survey. So I don't know if we want to have some concluding points. If anyone has any last thoughts.
You really hurt me.
I will leave this with the last thing. So my mentor was always like, there, as much as there's a speaker on the stage, someone had to create the poster for them to get there. And I don't know why that has stuck with me, is like, it doesn't matter if there's someone on stage unless there isn't work being done with all the other stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, that's a really good sticking point. Yeah, I feel like that's a good spot to conclude and wrap up.
Well, could I throw out and jump in and just say,
Yes, you can. Yes,
I
you
kind of
can,
want
Christy.
everyone, if they'd be willing to just say a word, you don't have to, but say a word of, or an action idea or some takeaway that you have from either this session, or I know it's our last session, that I don't know, that this has brought up. I'll start. I'll try and model. I want to hold up. Actually, it comes from Carly's example. Glenn Matoba, who is a professor at Columbia, who ended up, one never knows when you kind of are risking things, but was able to stand up against all odds and support students there. And I just think, yeah, it makes me realize, no, I've got to figure out how I can stand up. So thank you all.
Yeah, Glenn is an amazing professor. He was my professor when I was there as well. And it really is finding those people who make room for everyone who's learning. He did a really good job of empowering all of us in the classroom. For some of us, his class was the first time we were really doing an introduction to human rights in like a more traditional sense. While all of us had engaged human rights on some level, he welcomed us with open arms and let us make mistakes and guided us. And by the end of it all, we felt way more empowered. And it kind of really wraps up that example with Tia, where Glenn might have been standing on the stage, but as a class, we were really working together. And by the end of it, we all felt much more comfortable. So Julie can't speak out right now, but in the chat added that Julie is going to continue engaging young people to pursue human rights education and action. I like that, Julie. I think encouraging young people. Go ahead.
Hi,
Christy.
yes, thank you. Sorry, I'm on my phone, so sorry if it sounds all weird. But I just want to thank you guys because before signing up for this, I knew nothing of youth rights and didn't know something like this existed. And so having the privilege to be able to be educated and learn from you all has been astounding, and I'm so grateful. I know it's definitely changed how I interact with youth in my life and will continue to do so, and making sure that they feel safe and they feel heard with me at least. So thank you guys.
Thank you for sharing that. I'm glad that you felt this was really impactful and worthwhile. But yeah, we all have to start somewhere, and it's nice to hear that you felt this was a good starting point for you.
Well, and I just, because Jarwin put something in the chat, I want to also recognize him because he helped us kind of launch this training as action series and did a lot of the promotional work for this too. So I'm glad that, I don't know if you want to read his words. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Christy. It's my honor.
Deborah, I think you have your hand up. Feel free.
Yeah, I wasn't able to sign on till later, but as soon as I got it, the message from Christy, I talked to, there's a whole youth group in Amnesty International, and I knew a professor who was in touch with them. So I gave it to him to give to this group. So hopefully some of the people were on and I didn't know it, but Amnesty has a very active youth group, and that they wanted to have a youth member on the board who was somewhere between the ages of 18 to 24. That was something they worked for, and it's something that's being in the works right now for a board member. So, Amnesty International has a whole youth group that you guys could join right now. So you could get a hold of me and I can get a hold of the professor who's real excited about them, and he's made himself available for them. So, and how many are very many people here on Amnesty International? Oh, it was recorded and posted. Okay. So, and I would like to see hopefully, because I know this whole thing was recorded, I would like to see the first hour.
We can definitely get that to you, Deborah. And thank you for your words. We will absolutely, this idea of intersectionality and engaging young people is something we continually need to tap into. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's funny that you raised that point because that's a conversation that's happening in the nonprofit world where I am. I'm in rural Michigan right now, and I was just meeting with some other nonprofit leaders talking about how do we get young people to feel like they are welcome on a board of directors or a steering committee. So we look at those often as young people and see that it's a lot of people who might be retired. In my area, it's a lot of men, and so it's like, how do we start making that feel welcoming? And kind of address the barriers that young people might be feeling in joining those boards. Yeah, that's a really good point, Deborah. We'll also be sending out the notes so that you can see what was happening in the other breakout rooms if you missed any of the conversation in the breakout rooms. So, and I really like Jess's point about being invitational. I think that goes with engaging young people in boards and other forms of activism. How do we extend that invitation and make people feel like they are welcome and safe where they are? So, alrighty. Now we really are cutting it close on time and we need to get you all a feedback survey. So,
While Carly's doing that, she'll post the feedback survey in the chat. Couple kind of final thoughts for everyone. One, we'd like to thank all of our sponsors for this entire TAAS series 2024-2025. We have a number of organizational partners we work very closely with. So we want to thank all of them. They have contributed and really supported a number of wonderful workshops and training series from September until now. As we said, we have recorded this and we will be posting this on the HRU USA website. We also have steering committee elections coming up in the summer. Elections typically happen in June, so please pay attention to our website, our newsletter, and any social media blasts about potentially running for a steering committee position. We would love to have you. We'd love to, put your foot out there to run and potentially be a candidate. We can definitely get you more information if you're interested. We also have a regional rep network that is really thriving across a number of parts of the country. If you're interested in getting involved with regional reps, please feel free to send an email to Christy, and we can definitely get in touch about any possibilities there. And then Carly, yes, I think the survey's in the chat.
Yeah, I dropped the survey in the chat, so that's the first link you'll see. And then the second link is a link to subscribe to HRE USA's newsletter. If you want to watch for those posts about other events, roundtables, the social media postings, and also the thanks, Christy, and also the steering committee elections. We also want to thank our 2024-2025 Training as Action series sponsors. In the end, we had 20 sponsors, which is amazing. It's nice to see 20 organizations supporting human rights education, especially centered around conversations around youth rights, and the anniversary of the Convention on the Rights of the Child, particularly in this point in time. So yeah, feel free to take a second to do that survey. And thank you all for such an impactful conversation. It's moments like these that are kind of like revitalizing to go into the week with. Just a nice reminder that there's people spread all around who are doing this work and who we can lean on. So.
As you're filling that out, Carly and I will stay on for a few minutes, but feel free to take that survey. We'd love you to fill it out here before you leave for the evening. And as you leave for the evening, we wish you all the best.
Thank you. Thank you, Carly and Jake. Great work.
Thank you, Sandy, for all
Great
your
to
help.
meet everybody.
Yes, it was great to meet everybody.
Okay. I'm going to sign off. Great to be part of this.
Bye, Sandy. Thank you.
Take care.
Okay.
And Jake, I think you need to stop the recording.
I will.
You have the hosting. Thanks.